Are you looking for a podcast where you can hear from real people regarding their real dental drama? If so, then you've come to the right place. Join hosts Bethany Petty and Dr. Rena Kuba as we dive into the solutions we've created and the mistakes we've made while managing dental drama. Let's get started. All right, welcome. Today I have an extra special guest in the closet with me today. It happens to be his closet too, so it's my husband. And for those of you who do not know, my husband is a teacher for high school students, but has a genuine love for, economics,
politics, all of it.
All of it. He missed his calling as a TV show host talking about economics and politics. Two of my least favorite subjects. And so oftentimes I'll come home and ask him all kinds of questions about big picture stuff because I know that economics ultimately impacts small business. And right now we're sitting in a different economic situation. And so I've had more questions for him as of late. And so I thought it might be helpful for our listeners to get a little bit of an economic lesson from you, because that's where I get my economic lessons from. So first and foremost, can you give us kind of a summary of, as simple as possible, so pretend like you're explaining it to me.
Okay.
The general economic situation right now.
Okay, so the general economic situation right now is we have a stubborn inflation and a very good economy, which sounds backwards, and I completely understand that. But you got to look at it as a 2-year hold. Like when the pandemic happened, the entire world was put on hold. The United States did the same thing, and then we flushed the system with cash. And so all these people were out of jobs but had money to spend. And the demand was way higher than what supply could hold on to, which is what kind of caused the current rise. But as you know, with dentists and with pretty much everybody, people were paid more to stay at home and then to work. And so that caused wages to go up. And so to fast forward all that to now, we just now caught up to the employment status that we were pre-pandemic. We've really not added new jobs. You hear these reports all the time, but technically we've not added new jobs. We have regained those jobs at a higher wage. And so, and that's why inflation's stubborn, because inflation went up. People had cash, now they have jobs with higher cash, and so they're continuing to spend, how that affects, I guess, your clients and people out there, small business everywhere, is the cost of like paper, the cost of equipment, the cost of the stuff is really high, and they're paying employees really high, and so small businesses are struggling. So that's why a hot economy, good job reports and all that, and economists are like, yeah, we're fixing to have a recession because small businesses can't keep up. You saw big tech layoffs in California. California was running. They're running out of deficit, meaning they can't keep up with they're not making enough money to what they're spending. And so you're going to start seeing other states that were in surplus running deficits. So
basically, the way that you're describing it is because of the pandemic, we've had kind of this almost delayed consequence.
Ripple,
a ripple effect. Okay. And then I ask you this all the time, and so, again, you can break it down in simple terms, but ultimately, why I keep asking you, why do we keep having all of these rate increases and all of this? It doesn't make sense to me. If we know, or the government knows, that we're headed into this recession because of what you just described, then why, because they are in control of that rate, why continue to increase the rate?
Well, it's almost like a shame on you policy, I guess you can say, from the government, if you want to do it simple. But basically, I tell my kids this all the time. And I told them this a year and a half ago, and I told them beginning this year when we started our economic stuff, is that what the Fed's goal is, people have to lose their jobs, they have to lose their cars, and they have to lose their houses. That's what they want. And it sounds bad. Yeah. Right, it sounds bad. Because as an entire whole, we can't continue to pay $10 for a dozen eggs. Like, we can't continue to pay, and like your clients and stuff, they can't continue to pay their overage costs because like it's going to tank everything. If you get into a hyperinflation situation, which we came close, it started coming down. Like what they did, they were late, very late.
Who was late?
The Fed for what they're doing. So they started this about a year ago in March. They should have started in 2020. They should have started in the winter, probably of 2020, 21. But they've been doing it. I mean, 2021, the fall of 2021. But they didn't start until March of last year, and they started like really hard. Like they raised rates. We went from basically 0 to 4.5, like crazy. And the whole thought was get people to stop spending money. Well, people want to stop spending money, and so now we're in a point where our year-over-year inflation, meaning inflation rose to 6% at this time last year when they were doing it, started raising rates. Now the data is going to be kind of skewed. We got to go month to month, which is what we've done. And it went down this last time, but people, they're still going to raise rates. I mean, people have hopes that they're going to they're going to pause it because all the bank stuff going on, but they're raising rates because they need people to spend less money, basically.
Okay.
Which is why banks are going to stop lending money pretty soon. I mean, they've already started.
Yeah.
Another sign that you're seeing, which the Fed should look at, I hope they look at, is credit cards. Balances have increased. Default rates have increased, meaning people have started defaulting on their credit cards. And so those are all signs that something's working. But they have a goal, which I don't know that's capable. They want to get it into the 3 and 4%. Right now we're running at high 5%. And so they're wanting to get it down to a 2% inflation rate, which I don't know that's possible.
And the way to get it down to that 2% is the loss of jobs,
right.
Less
money in the economy,
spending.
less spending. So if you look at it, what causes here, because we had all that cash come into the system, and people were on Amazon, going on vacations, and doing all this stuff, buying cars, buying houses. You know, interest was low, so you can go buy a house, and so you raise these rates. It causes your car interest rate to go up, so you can afford less car, you can afford less house, and the idea was basically to slow it down. Mm-hmm. The problem what makes this different from any time in history is that we had a supply issue with the cars. Like we already had a microchip issue. That was before the pandemic. We already had that issue, and then that was exaggerated. So then you had or it's made it worse by the pandemic, but because all the shutdowns and stuff, and so then that made less cars available. So like cars jumped up. So that caused inflation to be a big one. And then, of course, the housing market, people weren't selling their houses because people weren't going places. So the inventory was already really low, and it became lower. And so that's why your home prices, like here in Texas, went to you had houses that were $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 now going for $600,000, $700,000. And that's the primary reason is because there's not enough inventory. And so those are not good indicators anymore, I guess is what I'm trying to say. They have to look at basically household things and like things that small businesses buy to see where we are in our economy.
So when you say that banks they've already started slowing down on their lending, mm-hmm. potentially will have it sounds like that's going to continue to increase, that they're mm-hmm. going to lower their approval for certain types of lending.
Right.
Do you see that impacting, let's say, a small business needing to get a loan for a piece of equipment or mm-hmm. A new doctor trying to start?
They're going to be impacted the most.
Okay.
Mainly because of risk, depreciating value of assets and stuff like that. Those are things that are going to be small business is going to be hurt the most by that. And like I said, cash was free for so long. Like when I say free, meaning you can put risk out there because the interest rates were so low. All right, so you're not going to lose as much depreciation on things. But now with interest rates so high, principals are going to come down a lot slower, and banks aren't going to be willing to lend for a certain amount of risk. They're going to be they're going to stick to it. Like for example, in the housing market, they would push a debt to income ratio. They would push a 40%. and over the last several years, they're probably going to stick to that 36, 37% just alone. Like if your debt to income is above that, they're probably not going to lend it, just because they're going to have to prepare. They're preparing for recession too. And what banks do and businesses do, they try to shore up all that because they know that they're going to have less money in the bank because people will lose their jobs. When people lose their jobs, there's going to be less money in the bank. They actually use the money in the bank for their loans, so they're going to have less. Their bottom line is going to be less to lend out, so there's going to be more risk on them, and then of course all the defaults, and there's just all this whole picture stuff that's going to cause them not to lend.
Okay. Do you also see it impacting, like a lot of my clients have people in patients in their practice that will sign up for care credit or medical credit cards that help them pay for some of their dentistry? Do you see that will go down?
Maybe not, because that's like a get now, pay later type deal. And so even in recessions, they'll have that because on the back end of it, it's like a $1 interest rate, right? So you may have 12 months, no interest, but then that 13th month is at like 28. All right. And so most people don't want to default. They're going to pay that stuff. They're going to pay that off in a year before they hit that interest rate. Just out of fear of that interest rate, even though it may be, $30, they don't see it. They see a 28% interest rate, increase, and so they don't want that, and so they'll try to pay it off. Even in the last recession, we had a lot of that stuff still available, which was in 2008.
Okay. You also mentioned to me in one of our conversations that we are starting to lose some jobs. We've had some layoffs, but you mentioned to me we're losing in the wrong industries. Can you explain what that means?
So most of the layoffs have come in the tech industry. And what I mean by the wrong industry is like, a lot of that was venture capital. Like a lot of that was like, it's not Joe Schmo, it wasn't really small business related because the small businesses couldn't hire enough. They're not out there. They're still not out there. Like I said, it's funny to me when either the White House or the news or all those people start touting jobs added or jobs created. When they start talking, we created this much jobs. We didn't create, we added, but they're just regained. And so these small businesses, they hadn't had them. So we're losing an industry where these people were making lots and lots of money already. And so they're not going to be as hurt. And it doesn't hurt the economy as much as when you start losing jobs in like manufacturing and housing and stuff like that, which we finally did this month. Small percentage. We finally did, but it's a year into the Fed trying to lower rates and get this happen for it to happen. And so losing in the tech industry doesn't really hurt the economy enough, and it doesn't really impact, small businesses and stuff as much. So that's why it's the wrong.
Do you foresee that if the Feds continue to push their goal, which is to get inflation back down, you said to like 2 or 3%, that ultimately it will impact?
Oh yeah, they're gonna. I mean, for example, we had a crazy banking issue a couple of weeks ago where we had a bank fail, and then you had this panic where people went and took all their money out of the bank, which impacts the banks. Is like a lot of banks were saying no, like you can't do that, like we can't take that money out. And this was just big depositors, but a lot of people went and took their money out, like small people and small banks, even though that wasn't impacting anything. Like they didn't have to do that. There was no reason, but there was this big panic that they were going to lose all their money. And a week later, they still rose their rates, even though there was this banking turmoil. And it's kind of leveled itself out. So the Fed was right that they thought it was level itself out. But in the world as a whole, in Europe, it's still pretty volatile. This is about as schizophrenic as gas prices. Like one day or 2 days, okay, we're going to be good. And all of a sudden there's another break, teetering. Yeah. And when I say teetering, they're meaning they're going to, they're looking for people to buy, X amount of debt or whatever. And so when they start pushing that or putting out these headlines, then most people get the tea leaves that they're in trouble. And so every week we have a bank that's doing that. And they continue to raise. And that was a pretty big deal. Most people thought they would pause, that this was a good sign that it was working. And when it happened, it actually was deflationary, which they need those practices, but it was on their own because the banks, when they saw this, other banks, big banks like Bank of America, who was not even close to being hurt, the bank that went down was completely venture capital, meaning they were high risk, like they were in high risk places, and so these interest rates rose. They couldn't afford. No one could afford those payments, and so that's why they collapsed. But these banks, these big banks, they actually started their lending practices slowing down just because of they thought this was a good sign of what's to come, and so that worked. But they still raised the rate.
So do you feel like, and I know I've asked you this several times, like what's the ceiling? Like when does the rate cap out? And I know it's hard to pin that down, but you've made some projections for me that
it is hard. I still think we're looking all year long that they're going to continue to raise rates.
Okay.
Jerome Powell has been consistent in his message, and it's funny, it's weird when I hear other pundits and people talk about, okay, maybe this happened, or people on Twitter, okay, they give good reasons for why he should stop, but like he's been clear. He has a goal, and he thinks the long-term goal, if we stay at this inflation rate, long-term, it will hurt. And you hear it a long time, because for the longest time you heard $15 an hour, right, is the livable wage. Mm-hmm. Well, the livable wage now is $25 an hour, right? And so where Jerome Powell sees this at is because of the higher costs. So people are paid more, but they're not seeing the benefit of it, right? They're able to sustain. So they're getting paid. Let me guess. In your range, somebody who was making 16 now is probably making 22, 23, right?
Yeah,
that's a big increase, but they're able to afford the same because everything stayed the same.
Yeah, it's not actually increase their quality of life.
Right, and in fact, in small businesses, and I think we've talked about this before, some of your dentists are still stressed out because they're actually paying more. They're not seeing any of that goodness, right? So their employees, nothing's changed with their lifestyle, even though they got a $7 raise. They're actually hurting more, and that's the point of Jerome Powell and the Fed. There has to be a pain at some point that has to be inflicted on our economy to straighten it out.
Okay. And so you feel like the rates are going to continue to sustain or even increase at least throughout this year.
Right. I think they'll continue to increase throughout this year, and then they won't cut rates the next year. They'll keep them high where they're at. And so you're going to be looking at that 5.5% to 7.5% rate on houses and 7 to 10% on cars. You're going to look at that. So, but what's going to happen is people aren't going to afford that $70,000, $75,000 SUV that they were buying at 2%. That 7%, they're going to go used. And then so you're going to start seeing dealerships change, which they already started. They may go direct buyer, so you'll start seeing like dealerships close. So where Ford will, or those people, they'll actually do direct car like shipping, almost like a Carvana type deal, but they'll do it they won't do it with a dealer.
Yeah. So then if you can kind of project with me, if we assume rates are going to continue to increase and the Feds ultimately get the result that they intended by the end of the year, let's say, then your projection is that next year we'll stay at those kind of higher rates. We won't see much downturn. Can you kind of paint a picture for us, like thinking of my clients or small businesses? What does that mean for them over this next, essentially, almost 2 years?
Right. Well, them and any small business, they just have to start thinking like in the recession mindset, and not like a negative, like, Debbie Downer, like, oh, this is going to be terrible. You got to look for opportunity. And so opportunity means, what are some things that you can offer when people aren't willing to spend as much money, or where people aren't willing to, so I bet the first thing people don't think about is the teeth.
Yeah. Unfortunately not.
Yeah, like they don't want to inflict pain on themselves when they can't spend any money, right? And so that they're going to start thinking that what one of my really good friends call mailbox money. What is some mailbox money you can create, meaning it's something that is residual? From what I've understood, and when you working with the practices you've worked with, and when you worked in a practice, I don't think we talked about this earlier, was insurance. I think is one of those things that seems to be
the bane of our existence.
The bane of your existence, but also the one thing that can produce a stream of income that maybe you didn't have.
Right. So looking for ways, when you say a recession mindset, kind of looking for ways, it's almost like we can't just depend on what we've always had, but starting to almost kind of store up, where else can we find streams of income or things that maybe we haven't considered before. Right. Do you feel like with practice owners that there's anything? So I actually want to spend a different episode talking with you about kind of recession proofing your practice. But can you think of anything for practice owners or small business owners that they really need to be watching on an economic standpoint? Like if you, I'm like, you give me the Cliff Note versions of economics, but it's important information for me to know as I consult with practices. But for the practice owners that don't have you in the household, where do they need to be watching, and where do they need to focus their attention to stay up to speed on economic changes?
I mean, you can pretty much there's a lot of sources out there for them to look at, but the best source would be, I would say, their employees and their clients. Like that's the number one. So if you have employees looking for more money or higher bonuses, which they always do, right? But if you notice that there's a different type of urgency to it, or you have clients who typically were coming in or patients coming in that were generally, they came in with that, and they're all, I need to put this off. Then you'll start noticing your local school districts, if they stop laying off people. If you have a certain like a paper mill or a certain industry that's in your town, and they start laying off, then
that's kind of telltale signs.
We've arrived. Okay. Yeah, that you've arrived. And you'll start seeing that anyway, just because of rent. Like people who rent, or they're not owning their homes. Like those clients and patients and employees that rent, I mean, they're fixing to hit a crunch too. So
yeah. So once we reach that point, so I know that it can hit different states or different cities at different times based on the economic strength of that particular city. But once you start seeing, okay, now it's hitting us. Our local factories had a bunch of layoffs, or, this company that's in our town is starting to lay off people. Once they hit that point, is there a typical amount of time historically that those job losses, okay, people start, getting laid off, and now we're going to be here for the next 2 years? Or
years.
Okay.
Years. Sometimes never. Depending on, it's all depending. It really is all depending. Like if you watch gas prices right now, I mean, they're $2.87 one week and they're $3.30 the next. Like, it's very schizophrenic, and that impacts everything. Everything. If you watch diesel, though, diesel's been pretty consistent, but that affects consumer spending. And so, what these big businesses, like if you're talking about like paper mills and like things like that, industries, titans, like GM and stuff like that. A lot of times they don't bring those jobs back.
Okay.
Unless the economics have changed. Unless like the complete, and I don't mean like by recession, I mean like there's incentives out there from the hire, which has happened in the past. Obama did it, incentivized through basically, people call it bailouts, whatever you want to do. People got to keep their jobs, bottom line. And so that's pretty much what would happen.
So once it constricts, we can kind of expect that it either stays at that rate let's say we lose a lot of people from our small town because that factory closed. There's a pretty good chance that long term those people don't come back.
Right. When you start seeing, here's when you'll start seeing rates be cut. When home builders stop building homes, when car dealers stop selling cars, and when there is a shortage of things on the shelves, like a legit shortage, not because we're going out and buying 30 pounds of meat, right? Because we're panicking. A legit shortage of stuff, you'll start seeing them cut because they need to incentivize. So, for example, we'll say it's paper mill. I don't know why I keep using that one, but I used it.
It's a good one.
Okay, let's say it's a paper mill. All right, and so that starts happening. Well, we need more jobs. We need to spend more money because we need to produce more. And so they'll go hire it, or at the egg plant or whatever. They'll go hire it. They'll incentivize those. The government will incentivize those through that. They'll also cut rates so that you can go buy a car and you can go buy a house. And so they'll start doing that. But like I said, you have to get to those dire straits. And usually it'll be a year or so. And the way this Fed acts, I mean, they seem to be late on everything. So they'd be slow to do it anyway. But they would. They would once things get to that point. And it sounds dire. It really does. But we've been through there several times. In the late 80s, we were there. And everything was great in the mid-90s. We were there in the 2000s, of course. And now we're here there now. Mm-hmm.
So it's something
it's an evolution. Like our economy evolves. It just does. One of the reasons why Detroit is no longer Detroit is because machines were able to do things that humans could, right? And they replaced human jobs. And what you've seen in the last two presidents to try to fix this is hire American, buy American, and so that might help, but it costs it would cost a company a lot more money to have someone make something in America than make it somewhere else.
Yeah. So overall, it sounds like we need to kind of tighten our seatbelts, plan on probably some continued increases throughout this year, 2023, and then the hope, it sounds like, which sounds awful to even say that, but the hope is that the feds see what they need to see out of these continued increases this year.
Right.
That ultimately, the way you've described it is we kind of tank the economy intentionally so that it will rebound. And
that's what you hear people call hard landing, and that's where the camp I'm in. Some people think it's going to be soft and mild, and a soft landing, meaning that it's to be such a recession that no one hardly notices. And that so you have these tech layoffs, and you may have some housing layoffs, stuff like that, but it won't be noticed. And then they'll flatten out the rate, and that would be a soft best case scenario.
And I know you said that's what they're aiming for.
That's what they always aim for. But I mean, there's so many things that are teetering that who knows?
Yeah, it's like nailing jelly to a wall.
It really is, because like when you look at what they've done in the last year and the amount of progress they made, they've not made progress. They stopped it, slowed it. I mean, we got really high there for a minute, almost like 9% or something like that. That was really bad. And I showed the chart to my kids because it's something they'll never see before, where you had demand like 40% higher than supply, and you just don't ever see that ever. Usually they're like tightly, like almost like a braid, up and down. But it looked like somebody had just severed something. Wow. And so they fixed that problem. But we still have supply issues, global supply issues. And so, but we'll see.
Got to wait and see. Huh?
That's what everybody says. Just wait and see.
Wait and see what happens. Well, thank you for the probably very dumbed down version of economics. But
I hope people didn't get like depressed.
Yeah,
it's only gonna get worse. No, just kidding. It's not.
You're like it kind of is, but it'll be fine, right?
It'll be fine. Yeah, it'll be fine. But people's been there before.
Yeah, we've survived it before. Which I think is a good takeaway
we have
message.
Survived it before.
Yeah. Let's not be depressed.
Yes.
Let's think about the good old days where we did this and survived.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for filling us in today.
Awesome. Of course.
Thanks for joining the conversation today. We hope that you are comforted in knowing that you are not alone, but we also hope that you're walking away with some really great tips and tricks to try in your practice. We value your feedback, so please take a few moments to rate and review the podcast. Finally, we want to make sure that we're covering the topics that matter to you. So track us down on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and let us know what topics you want us to cover. As always, please know that we are rooting for you today as you manage your dental drama.